So from Nationwide, I'd like to introduce Eric Hayden, and following Eric on stage will be Kimberly Profit as well. So let's give a warm welcome to Kimberly and Eric.
We are excited to present today. Wow, loud. We're excited to present today. We've been asked to present on the Ariba technology, and we've implemented it. And what we're going to show you is how we use that platform and how we planned to use that platform from the very beginning to reach what we ultimately knew we absolutely needed, which is to have a procurement organization that is data-driven and can affect, thank you, and can affect the results of our business partners. And that's what we're hoping to show today. We're going to try to leave time for questions, just in case y'all have some questions, so we'll kind of race through this. So the first slide that you're going to have, nope. Yep, there we go. Yeah, I won't go through the agenda, but we're going to cover these things. The first slide, though, is the one that I really want to spend some time on, and that's what we've accomplished, and then we'll tell you how we got there. This one does not seem to want to move things. Next slide, please. Thank you. And next slide. All right, so this is what we're going to take you through and kind of how we got here. So right now, Nationwide is 97% compliance spend on a blanket purchase order or purchase order. That means we connect all of our spend to a contract. 89% of our suppliers are registered and transacting on the Ariba network. And we have a 0 non-PO submission effective Q2 this year. So we will eliminate all non-POs. 4,200 suppliers are registered, and we have less than 100 paid suppliers that have an exception to either the registration or the transacting on the network. 99% of our invoices are submitted via Ariba. 100% of executed contracts are submitted through Ariba. That's whether they're procurement-led or the business unit has executed them. They're required to come through procurement so that we can set them up on the Ariba contract compliance invoice framework. 100% of procurement savings are validated by finance and systematically tracked. 100% risk review completed on every executed contract with mitigation and acceptance logged in the system. And 60% reduction in customer service calls related to invoicing. So these are the things, this is where we are today. So kind of how did we get there? Next slide. I will say, shout out to SAP on this one. We actually engaged them from the very beginning to help us define our business case, our savings, and kind of what the operational model would need to be to attain the goals. For the most part, we followed a fair amount of the recommendations that they gave us. We set up different teams, we set up different capabilities inside of procurement to really ensure that we were enabling the strategy, which you see here. The $16 million worth of savings, that was a very, very conservative estimate that we put into the business case. We have completely outpaced that original estimate on the savings. Invoice reduction, I mean, we are literally down to 100 invoices submitted that we're manually entering. So just in automation, we've reduced staff, we've put more automation in because we're able to do that with this. So that $16 million we've outpaced. We've optimized our buying channel strategies. So again, blanket purchase order, we have lots of catalogs, we do guided buying. So we've really enabled that enablement strategy, but we put a supplier enablement team in place because that is the key and it's critical to make sure you connect your suppliers to this process and you absolutely train and help them be effective. And then the operating model, which is, as I just chatted, we put a source-to-pay technology in place. So we have now connected procurement all the way through to our accounts payable teams. And it never had been in place with Nationwide before. Now it is, and it has made all the difference. Next slide. So what did we choose to focus on? This is what SAP gave us, which is great, and there's a lot of really good things in there. And I would say we probably have attained some of of everything that's here. But the ones that are highlighted in green, as we were thinking about the build, as we decided what it was we wanted to implement, what it was we wanted to put an operating model around, it was the ones in green that we said, these are the most important things for Nationwide. We really want to focus on the things that we believe, one, we can attain, and two, will bring the most value to the organization. So as we built, it was with these in mind. Next slide. So this is an operating model, and you guys will get this deck, so I'm not going to go through this, but these are some of the key functional considerations that we had to take into mind as we were starting to build out our teams. We moved people to different roles. We built different job descriptions. We hired different people with different skill sets to enable this. And I will say that is one of the things SAP said, in their opinion, made one of the more fundamental differences, is that you have dedicated people who are operating in this new paradigm, who are governing the process and ensuring that you're meeting your success metrics. It really has made the difference for why we are at those metrics that I shared with you earlier. Next slide. And next slide. So last slide, I will tell you, for me, I believe, other than the technology itself, the thing that's made the absolute difference is we put a source to pay policy in place. And it was signed off on by our OCO, Office of the CEO. Every single one of our executive vice presidents aligned to the policy and agreed they would hold their organizations accountable to being compliant. So one, what is a supplier? What has to come through procurement? If it doesn't come through procurement, you still have to submit the contract so that we could put the BPO in place. No PO, no pay. That was huge because some of our suppliers are also our customers. So our OCO had to be very confident that they would hold our suppliers accountable to submitting against the contract, to working inside the Ariba network, and we have maintained that to, again, less than 100 suppliers. So these were really critical in the way that we thought about our policy and holding Nationwide accountable. We've actually now tied, you'll look at the very last bullet, we've tied this policy compliance to an HR disciplinary action. So depending on the number of issues that a person does, enough non-compliance to this policy, they're submitted to HR. It's a termination offense. You can be terminated because it gets down to a fiduciary responsibility. Okay, next slide. And now I don't have to be the one you hear for a few minutes, so I'm going to turn it over to Eric, because we're going to actually walk through the reports and the data that we now have accessible to us and how we're using it to share with our business partners.
Yeah, so a couple things about how did we get here. So there are some practical ramifications that let us get to this point. We wanted to start with this one because this is where we kind of began. So if you look at the dates on here, you're looking at 2020, early in the year. This was right after we went live. So we went live about 3.5 years ago. Most of what you've seen so far was accomplished in the first 2.5 years. So we hit the ground running, and if you look here, one of our targets was the top quartile. So one of the things as we went live and worked with SAP on what our targets would be, we really wanted to focus on not just the industry average, but who are the top quartile of clients. So that was part of our goal, was to really drive that. So two things that really stand out to me in terms of how were we successful this quickly. One of them is we reduced as much as possible the friction that the supplier would have to invoice the way we wanted them to invoice. So pick your favorite ERP company, source to pay platform company. If you have a contract out there that's on a BPO and then invoice non-PO, how much money do you still have on that contract? So we chose a BPO over an ACC just because it was a couple of clicks faster for the supplier. It was longer for us, but it was easier for the supplier. So in every step we went through, we tried very hard to make sure we made it as easy and convenient for the supplier as possible to do what we wanted them to do. Because if we don't get the data back in, it doesn't matter how pretty the graph is, it's not going to be right. So that was one of the fundamental things. The other one was, how fast can we get to critical mass? So how fast can we get the most suppliers with the biggest spend and the highest volume of transactions going the way we want them to go? Because even though we had a policy, if that thing takes longer and longer and longer and longer, it tends to erode that confidence that executive leaders have in what you're trying to do. So how fast can we get to a point where we can show, here's the benefit we're gaining by having suppliers do this. And oh, by the way, I know you have this one complaining, but you have 10 others that you work with that are seeming to do things fine. Let's work with the one that we have a problem with. So here's where we started, and you can see very quickly how the manual invoices began to drop off. That's because you can't get all of your suppliers on immediately, right? You just don't have the bandwidth to do it. So we spent a lot of time figuring out how long do we think it's going to take for us to get a supplier ready to go. When we went live, I was responsible for supplier enablement, so it was one of our big targets was let's pick the right suppliers and make sure we have a time estimate. It was a fabulous spreadsheet with a great formula, believe me. But we had figured out how many can we go with, what kind of waves do we want to get this thing done so that we can max out this volume as quickly as possible. So let's go to the next one.
Really quick insert, if you guys are going through this. Don't let suppliers tell you that they refuse to do it. Some of the biggest suppliers who initially took the stance of, nope, we're not going to do this, are now transacting on the network. It really is just working with them, helping them be effective, helping them understand the value of it. So it does take time to get them on the network.
So this is one of the tabs of where we've morphed. So this is a lot more current. You can see this is toward the end of the year, and you can see all the high numbers, and we love to talk about the high numbers. I did want to point one thing out, that there at the bottom, I want to make sure that you feel comfortable that if you have a process of very high volume, low dollar transactions that you feel confident in, you can carry that forward. So don't feel like every one of those little bitty things has to be converted. You can deal with that. So that's what we have here. We've got an example. You can see obviously the vast majority is on that top line, but you'll see down there FLG. Guess what? We have field glass. Field glass we left in its own feed. So you can leave things like that, especially low risk, low dollar, things that are already managed. Don't feel like all of that has to transition all at once. Yeah. Okay, let's go to the next one.
But pay attention to the number of feeds, because we're going to then show you how we use spend enrichment across all of those feeds to make the data kind of normalized.
So here's another tab on that same deck that we have for metrics and so forth. You'll see we're beginning to look at supplier analysis about payment terms. So right now we're going through an effort on altering payment terms. So almost, if you look at it's at the top right. Yes, on your side too, it's at the top right. That's amazing how that works. PRC is kind of a subset of our accounts payable spend that is more for regulatory kind of activity. So we don't expect that to go through Ariba. Yeah. And you can see that the pay immediately is very, very high on that. But what is running through Ariba is much more indicative of what we want payment terms to be. That's because of the control we have when it is coming through Ariba. So this is a high value thing that we're looking at right now in terms of payment terms.
And this is a big focus for us right now because we are so compliant in the other areas. We actually just launched a major pay term initiative where we're going after supplier. That's the wrong way to say it.
Yes, targeting.
Okay. We're going after them suppliers. Yeah. We're targeting to try to find ways to convert suppliers to the higher pay term, including a lot of different payment type of options. So of course we want ACH and things like that to be predominant, and so all of that is what we're working on. So next year we hope that we're at least doubled on the percent. That's our goal. We want to be at least double in our percent on 60 days.
And it does make it easy. You can see here we have masked the names of the guilty, to prevent it. But it does make it easy for us to target very clearly because things are coming through the way we want them to come through.
Yeah.
So let's go to the next slide. All right, this is one of my favorite ones. All right, so in the orange at the top, so these are all of the non-compliant spend that we have. In the blue are the ones that we have purposefully given some sort of an exemption for. So it's already low, but look at the orange, how low that is. That's our target space. Now, what we didn't roll out here, and I wish we could have, but we had too much to mask to make this work, is we have a very, very crystal clear picture at this point, not just of what's on contract, but what's not on contract, because we know what's on contract. If you don't get that part done first, you can't see where your opportunity is. So we've spent a lot of time and effort trying to make sure that we knew where our opportunity lied by making sure that the invoicing was done correctly against the contract. So this is a great view for us. It helps us identify very quickly where we have high volume suppliers that may or may not have an exemption that is non-compliant.
Yeah. So the other thing that's interesting to note here, you keep hearing us say we've got a few exceptions, right? We are really, really thoughtful and very deliberate about when we'll allow an exception, including how long we'll allow it, because sometimes it just takes longer to get people on the network. But there's a couple, and I'll say this, Dun & Bradstreet is an interesting one. Not because they refuse to be on the network, but because the complexity of the way that they invoice would have been mind-numbingly difficult for us to build into line level detail in the blanket purchase order. So they submit on an Excel spreadsheet. It goes into a group of people inside a Nationwide who looks at every single line to make sure that it's accurate, right? So the amount of effort to validate the way the information is submitted in, we said that can't really be done well building it into a blanket purchase order. So that's the type of exceptions that we've given that are longer term. We're working with that group to see if there's a different way for Dun & Bradstreet to submit the information. For now, they need that level of detail, so we're going to leave them out. Okay.
All right, let's move to the next one. And the next. I think this one's you.
Yeah, so, again, we built with the intent. I've been in procurement for 23 years. I love procurement. Procurement has an amazing amount of data, but we struggle to put it in formats that our finance and business partners can actually understand and utilize. So then when we do, for all my finance people in the room, the first questions we used to get is this accurate? This doesn't feel accurate. I don't think this has this in it or this in it or this in it, right? So I've gotten that for years. We've actually now got data that our finance and our business partners can align to because of the way we present it, because they know that we've got a high level of compliance going through Ariba. So it is, when I say these questions are the ones we used to get, they're gone. So next slide, please.
All right, this is an example of one that we've got where we can filter any way that you want to filter, but the trick to it is it's giving you that ACC or BPO detail. So how much is left, on what contracts, who they belong to, who are the suppliers, how much money, all that is already here. So it makes it very easy for us to articulate not only when did we spend money in the past, but as we look forward, where are we spending money in the future? And you'll see that on the next one.
So I do want to pause on this one. Yeah, I know you're going to the next one, but for 1 second. Again, 23 years in procurement, I get excited by this stuff. What we do here as well is we do often have contracts where they're annual payments or payments when a deliverable's done. So sometimes we don't know the date, but what we know is the pattern. And so we even put a forecasted or an estimated date of impact. Our finance partners are using that to help to calibrate their budget forecast so that they can actually be a little closer on a monthly basis. It has reduced the manual journal entries that our finance partners have to do every single month because they don't know exactly when things are intended to come in. We've now got enough data and enough pattern and enough history that we're helping give them insight and be a little crisper in some of that forecasting.
And it goes back to the projections thing that we started with. So you take your traditional time and materials kind of an agreement. I don't know which of those roles I may be using at what point over the next 3 years. I know that it comes during that time period, so how do I estimate when am I going to spend my money?
Yeah.
It becomes kind of a difficult target. But that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get as close as we can, even if we don't necessarily have a targeted spend date. So on the next one, let's go to the next one, you'll see a little bit of what that target looks like. So that line bar that you've got there is where we've identified for this particular filter that we have here, where we have identified spend and in the month that we know that we're going to spend it. So you think about when your BPO is created, when you have a targeted expenditure date, I can identify when that's going to go out the door. So these are places where we have that. We don't always have that. And in those cases, we may have to estimate. But it gives us a really good starting point for a conversation with somebody about when am I going to spend my money. So you get your cost center kinds of owners. That's one of the things that they really want to know. So this is a nice breakdown here. You can see, and it's by filter, so we can identify all kinds of different ways for different filters, so you can do it by business unit, whatever you want.
So I will say the other way that we use this, and we've just started this, we started with our finance partners, but the way we're using this now is also our business. So I think all of us had an interesting 2022, right? And in procurement, what made it even more interesting was supply chain shortages, inflation, and a lot of other things. So every business unit was looking for opportunities for expense reduction. We could tell them, we could show them what their future commit looks like. And because it was tied to a contract, I could tell them what our term for convenience looks like. So I could literally give them a report that says, here's how much your future commit is with these suppliers against these contracts. Here's where your best opportunity fast to reduce your expenses if this is something that you think you can put on hiatus or wait for a year or wait for 3 years to accomplish. And they did act on it. They did make decisions off of this data. They did start to term some contracts or ask us to renegotiate some of the contracts as well. So it was from these views that we were able to say, this is where your biggest impact. Don't go and just say because you think this supplier, you can get different terms or term the contract may not be your best opportunity. $1 million here, but I could probably save you 10 million over here. So it was very helpful last year, and we are doing it again this year as we plan with our business partners.
And not to double down, but I will, is this only works if you get your invoices in correctly.
That's right.
Right, that's the key. And that's kind of what we're pushing here is do whatever it takes to double down on the methodology that works best for you. It won't be the same for everybody. There are some companies that are buying certain types of commodities are going to have one way. For us, it tends to be more around services. So we do an awful lot of milestone payment types of engagements. It's not as much product, it's more service. So the way that we have structured our way of doing it really lends to that kind of a nature. But that's kind of one of the critical things is that make sure that you are targeting how am I going to get those suppliers to invoice the way I want them to invoice. All right, next one. And here's an interesting one. So we're even doing this with claims. So our claims data we are running through, and the spend enrichment that's coming through on Ariba, we're also aggregating so that we can do an awful lot of analysis on claims. And like anybody else in the insurance industry, you've got your expense side versus indemnification. And obviously the indemnification side is a lot harder to wrap your arms around. We know that too. We're just working through this, and claims by its nature tends to be a little more difficult, but we are working toward it.
Yeah, this has been extremely helpful for our commercial and P&C lines of business as they're looking to continue to be customer ready, right? Digital, lower cost where we can have lower cost, superior products and things like that. So this tells us where the expense and the indemnification payments are higher, and they can then take a look at how that affects underwriting, actuarial, and all those other practices.
Let's go to the next one. You want this one? Or you
Yeah, we can tag team. So you heard Eric mention that we also have field glass. So we kept that as a separate feed, but it's a big part of what we do. So we have two types of contingent. One of them is the traditional staff augmentation. Another one is we do contingent with our global service providers, where we have an onshore offshore opportunity, and we run that through Fieldglass as well because it's rate card based. And then we just went live with Fieldglass SOW, where we're requiring suppliers to provide resource level data against fixed fee contracts. And yes, they hate it, and that's okay. We've still got a lot of success in the fact that they're starting to put that data through for us. So we now can actually break down our information by supplier, by location, by engagement type, and again, tell people where they're spending money. We've even broken it out to, like, are you using the wrong band? Are you paying too high against, other suppliers in the space, et cetera. So this has become a very powerful tool because it's a very high level of spend for Nationwide.
And I think this is one of those classics is you just told us all these great things about having a BPO. Did you lose your mind and decide to do it differently, right? Maybe, but no. If you think about Fieldglass, the difference with Fieldglass is it's designed to attach a person to a work effort.
Mm-hmm. One person.
Ariba really isn't, right? So in order to make Ariba work the way we needed to make it work, we would have had to done something we really didn't want to do and customize it way past what we wanted. So we ended up biting the bullet and mimicking the same success, creating child SOWs in Fieldglass very similarly to the way we were doing BPOs in Ariba.
Yeah.
And the transition has actually been remarkably good. especially the creation of it. Now, the suppliers are not anxious to spend all their time attaching people to that work effort. That's what we're fighting right now. But in terms of the invoicing process, it's been very sound.
Yeah.
All right, next one.
Slide. And this is just another example, like the level of detail that we're able to get now is just impressive. You can see here by skill, by actual skill set that we use, I'm able to break this down and say, here's the top skill sets that we have. And under app dev, I should have probably popped that one out, but you can see under data analyst, I can even take it down to the line level for inside of our organization. So I can give out to our line leaders, this is your resources, and these are the skill sets that you're indexing on. As you think about 2024 and 2025, what does this mix change to? Are we going to need more of these or less of these? Because that will affect the way that we go out to market with our staff aug suppliers and what we want to make sure they have a bench of resources against. And that is it. We could have brought more, but we've thought these were really the ones that kind of help you understand the way that we're using the data to literally affect and change the business decisions that are being made now, because we can give them the detail and the insight necessary to do that. We are also building out, we're leveraging this foundation to build out the category analysis. So for those of you who are in procurement, right, we're going to be using a bunch of this data, but in a dashboard format so that our procurement organization can come up with category strategies. Do I have too many suppliers? Do I have too few suppliers? Am I using it across the enterprise, but I'm not negotiating with my supplier at the enterprise level? I'm negotiating with my supplier at the business level. No, we need to change that, right? So we're actually building out, and it's in partnership with SAP's newer capability. Cross my fingers, it's coming out this year. Cross my fingers. In the category management capability that they're adding into the Ariba workflow. But in the absence of that, we're already starting to think about how to use this data to create kind of that category dashboard. So we're happy to take questions if anybody has questions. Sure.
First of all, thank you for sharing. This is great. Appreciate it. What is the tool that's building the dashboard here? Is that SAC?
It's multiple.
It is multiple.
We do use multiple tools for different purposes. So some of what you saw was Tableau. Some of it was Oracle Analytic Cloud. We also use that for some visualization. Some of it was, we had Power BI in there.
Power BI, yeah. And I don't know that the tool makes the difference, quite frankly, because they all have very similar capability. But so I would say Oracle Analytics we chose to use because we have a massive, massive amount of data, right? So we basically needed that table structure to help us to put things in logical order. Tableau and Power BI are really the visualization tools, right? And they're so similar. Tableau, Power BI, it doesn't really matter. As an organization, we've actually made a decision to move away from Tableau and more into Power BI. So we're making that shift. And we're also looking at, do we want to do something slightly different than Oracle Analytics? Because the data is getting really large. I mean, we're almost at year 4, right? So we're also exploring now data lake capability and things like that. So, yeah.
Yeah, I would recommend whatever you do, you're going to end up places where you're going to have to do calculated fields and things of that nature. So there's a lot of data scrubbing before it comes into the data, or otherwise you end up with not the thing that you wanted to see.
It's why it took us 2.5 years to get to this point. Everybody kept saying, I want the data, and we're like, no, you don't, because it ain't good yet. But we're there now because of the fact that we scrubbed, we've written rules, we've made logical groupings of information that's accurate.
$1 million question.
How many people? Okay, good, that's a good question. And it's, yep. So our contract compliance team has 1 manager and 4 individuals. And they do more than just contract compliance. So they also do invoice resolution. So if we do have, and we do have suppliers who don't do the right thing and they invoice the complete amount against what should be a line item amount, right? So at that point, it's going to reject. and then it closes the invoice down, so we have to go in and start it up again.
Non-catalog requisitions.
I'm sorry?
Non-catalog requisitions.
We got not, so they do more than just contract compliance, but there's a manager and 4 individuals on that team that manages that. We do also have a supplier enablement team. And so I've given a lot of shout outs to SAP. There's a lot of really positive things I like about the tool and about the company, and they're a great partner. I would say supplier enablement for me is probably the area where I wish we had a little bit more structure on the SAP side. So we took it over. We did our own training. We did our own, we do our own training documents. We post it out on the network. We kind of handle the calls and the call service associated to that because we want that very warm, very helpful experience for our suppliers. They're also customers. So we took over that, but I only have 3 people doing that piece of it. So it's not terrible. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
And we've plateaued too. Remember that as we've plateaued. So we've got 4,200 suppliers on. So we're no longer doing 150.
Yeah, no, we had 2 contractors
Yeah.
when we first went live. We had 2 contractors for 15 months, so almost a year and a half. We had 2 contractors that rounded us out to get to the 4,200. Yeah,
And we're at time.
are we getting the flag?
People are jealous of what you accomplished. I think it's phenomenal. We attempted about 10 years ago and are nowhere near where you are as far as acceptance and stuff, and my jaw is dropping. I'm shaking my head. I want to be with you. I make that happen. It's unbelievable. We tried enablement. It was a struggle. No one wanted to be on the network. We still have
Enablement's hard.
It is hard.
excruciating.
Yeah, it's hard. Us too. Yeah. And so I got a great, we've combined, and I've got a great partner in AP now. Yeah, yeah. So, all right, thank you all
to
very
Kimberly
much.
and Eric.
Yeah,
Good
thanks.
job.